The disapproving stares began the moment Lieutenant Colonel Jessica Martinez stepped foot onto Fort Braxton Army Base with her 7-year-old daughter Emma's hand clasped firmly in hers. The morning sun cast long shadows across the military installation. As Jessica navigated the maze of concrete buildings and uniformed personnel, each face she encountered carrying the same expression of barely concealed skepticism. "Mommy, why is everyone looking at us funny?" Emma whispered, her small fingers tightening around her mother's as they approached the base childcare center. Jessica squeezed her daughter's hand reassuringly, though her own stomach churned with familiar anxiety. "They're just curious about new faces, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." But Jessica knew better. At 34, she had spent 12 years in the military, climbing through the ranks with methodical precision and unwavering dedication. What the staring soldiers couldn't see beneath her crisp uniform and regulation hairstyle was a woman who had earned her position through blood, sweat, and countless sacrifices. What they saw instead was exactly what made them uncomfortable: a single mother in a combat leadership role. Colonel James Harrison, the base commander, had made his position crystal clear during their initial meeting 3 days earlier. His weathered face, carved by decades of military service, had barely concealed his displeasure as he reviewed her transfer orders. "I'll be frank with you, Martinez," he had said, not bothering to look up from his paperwork. "I requested an experienced combat leader for our Special Operations Training Division. What I got was a mother with childcare complications." Jessica had maintained perfect military posture despite the insult. "Sir, my record speaks for itself. 2 tours in Afghanistan, decorated combat veteran, expert marksman, and advanced tactical training certification. My personal situation has never interfered with my professional duties." Harrison had finally looked at her then, his gray eyes cold with assessment. "Your personal situation is about to become everyone's business on this base. We have protocols. Here, Martinez. Standards. When soldiers under your command are risking their lives, they need to know their leader's head is in the game, not worried about soccer practice and parent-teacher conferences." The memory of that conversation still stung as Jessica watched Emma disappear into the childcare center, her little backpack bouncing with each step. The facility looked adequate enough, clean, well-staffed, secure. But Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that she and Emma were walking into hostile territory. The background Jessica Martinez had never planned to be a single mother in the military. 5 years ago, her world had looked entirely different. She had been married to Captain David Martinez, a fellow soldier who shared her passion for service and her dreams of building a military career that mattered. They had been stationed together in Germany, both rising through the ranks with promising futures ahead of them. Emma's birth had been the brightest moment of their marriage, a tiny bundle of possibility that made every deployment and sacrifice worthwhile. David had been a devoted father during those early months, taking turns with midnight feedings and baby duty with the dedication of a soldier completing a mission. The cracks in their marriage began to show during Jessica's second deployment to Afghanistan. While she was leading convoy security operations through dangerous mountain passes, David was reassigned to a comfortable desk job at the Pentagon. The distance between them grew with each passing month, fed by resentment and competing priorities. "You chose your career over our family," David had said during one of their final arguments via video call. Jessica's face, streaked with desert dust and exhaustion, had filled the laptop screen as she tried to bridge the growing chasm between them. "Emma needs her mother, not another absent military hero." "I'm serving our country," Jessica had replied, her voice steady despite the pain in her chest. "Just like you. Just like we always planned." That was before we had a daughter who asks why mommy is always fighting bad guys instead of reading her bedtime stories. The divorce had been finalized, while Jessica was still deployed, leaving her to navigate single parenthood from 6,000 miles away. David had taken a civilian job and moved to Florida, visiting Emma sporadically and contributing the minimum required child support. Jessica had been left to balance the demands of military leadership with the constant worry of raising a child, largely on her own. The arrival Fort Braxton represented a fresh start for both Jessica and Emma. The base housed one of the military's most elite training programs, where experienced soldiers prepared for the most dangerous missions imaginable. Jessica's assignment to lead the Special Operations Training Division was a career milestone that she had worked toward for years. The base itself was a small city of 10,000 personnel, complete with its own schools, hospital, shopping facilities, and residential areas. Families lived in neat rows of military housing, children played in designated recreation areas, and the rhythm of military life provided structure and security for everyone within its boundaries. What Jessica hadn't anticipated was the intensity of the resistance she would face from both her peers and subordinates. The military had evolved significantly during her career, with women increasingly serving in combat roles and leadership positions. But Fort Braxton, with its concentration of special operations personnel and old-school military culture, felt like stepping back in time. Her first week had been a series of subtle and not-so-subtle challenges to her authority. During briefings, senior staff members would direct questions to her male subordinates instead of addressing her directly. In the officers' mess hall, conversations would pause when she approached, only to resume in hushed tones after she passed. Most frustrating of all, several soldiers under her command had requested transfers, citing philosophical differences with the new leadership structure. Master Sergeant Robert Torres had been the most vocal in his opposition. A 20-year veteran, with multiple deployments and a reputation for brutal honesty, Torres had requested a private meeting during Jessica's second day on base. "Ma'am, with all due respect," he had said, his weathered face set in hard lines, "the men in this unit have concerns about the new command structure." Jessica had leaned back in her office chair, studying the man who would be crucial to her success or failure in this assignment. "What kind of concerns, Sergeant?" "Combat readiness concerns, ma'am. These soldiers are training for life-or-death situations. They need to know their commanding officer can make the hard choices, can prioritize the mission over everything else. When you've got a kid to worry about." He had let the sentence hang in the air like a challenge. "Are you questioning my ability to command, Sergeant Torres?" "I'm questioning your priorities, ma'am. In a combat situation, when you have to choose between saving your soldiers and getting home to tuck your daughter into bed, which choice do you make?" The question had haunted Jessica for days, not because she doubted her answer, but because she knew it revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that surrounded her appointment. These men saw her motherhood as a weakness, a divided loyalty that would compromise her effectiveness as a leader. They couldn't see what Jessica knew to be true, that becoming a mother had made her a better soldier, not a weaker one. The responsibility of raising Emma had sharpened her focus, strengthened her resolve, and given her a deeper understanding of what she was fighting to protect. Every mission she completed successfully was another day of safety and freedom for her daughter. Every soldier she trained properly was someone who might return home to their own family. The first test, the first real challenge to Jessica's leadership, came during a routine training exercise in her third week at Fort Braxton. The scenario involved a simulated hostage rescue in an urban environment, with her team of 12 special operations candidates taking on the role of the rescue force. Jessica had spent hours preparing the exercise, studying the mock-up buildings, analyzing potential entry points, and developing contingency plans for various scenarios. She arrived at the training site before dawn, reviewing her notes and checking equipment, while the base slowly came to life around her. The candidates arrived, in groups, their faces reflecting a mixture of anticipation and skepticism. These were experienced soldiers, many with multiple deployments and specialized training. They had volunteered for the Special Operations Program, knowing it would push them to their physical and mental limits. What they hadn't expected was to be led by someone they viewed as an outsider. Sergeant Torres positioned himself near the back of the group, his arms crossed and his expression neutral but watchful. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, one of only 3 women in the program, stood apart from the others, her isolation a reminder of the gender dynamics that permeated military culture. "Listen up," Jessica began, her voice carrying easily across the assembled group. "Today's exercise simulates a hostage situation in an urban environment. 3 civilians are being held in the central building. Your mission is to extract them safely while neutralizing the threat. Rules of engagement are standard. Positive identification required before taking any shot. Private First Class Michael." Rodriguez raised his hand, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Ma'am, what if the hostages include children? Does that change our tactical approach?" The question was clearly designed to rattle her, to force her to acknowledge the personal dimension that her critics believed compromised her judgment. Jessica met his gaze steadily, recognizing the test for what it was. "The safety of all civilians is the primary objective," she replied calmly. "Age doesn't change the tactical requirements, but it may influence our breach strategy and extraction methods. Any other questions about the mission parameters?" The exercise began with Jessica positioned at the command post, monitoring the team's progress through radio communications and surveillance feeds. She watched as the soldiers moved through their approach, their training evident in their coordinated movements and clear communication. But something was wrong. The team was moving too aggressively, taking unnecessary risks in their eagerness to complete the mission quickly. Jessica could see gaps in their coverage, moments where their formation left them vulnerable to counterattack. "Alpha Team, hold position," she radioed. "You have blind spots at your 2 and 10 o'clock positions." "Copy that, Command," came Torres's voice over the radio. But Jessica could see through the surveillance feed that the team continued moving without adjusting their formation. The simulated enemy forces, played by base security personnel, were positioned to exploit exactly the vulnerabilities Jessica had identified. Within minutes, half of her team had been killed by opposition forces they should have detected and neutralized. "Exercise terminated," Jessica announced over the radio. All personnel returned to the assembly area for after-action review. The walk back to the briefing area was tense, with the candidates exchanging glances and muttered comments about the failed mission. Jessica could feel their frustration and disappointment, emotions that she knew would soon transform into anger, directed at her leadership. "That was a disaster," Rodriguez said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe if we had a commanding officer who understood combat tactics instead of daycare management, we wouldn't have gotten half the team killed." Several other soldiers nodded in agreement, their faith in Jessica's leadership clearly shaken by the failed exercise. Torres remained silent, but his expression spoke volumes about his assessment of her performance. Jessica felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with being challenged, the same feeling she had experienced during her first firefight in Afghanistan. But this time, the enemy wasn't foreign insurgents armed with outdated weapons. This time, she was fighting for respect and legitimacy from the very people she was supposed to lead. "The mission failed," she began, her voice cutting through the murmurs and complaints. "Because you ignored direct orders from your commanding officer. I identified tactical vulnerabilities and provided specific guidance to address them. That guidance was disregarded." "Ma'am," Torres interjected. "With respect, we followed standard operating procedures for hostage rescue operations. These are techniques that have worked in real combat situations. These are techniques that got half your team killed in a controlled training environment," Jessica replied sharply. "In real combat, those casualties would represent actual soldiers, who won't be going home to their families." The mention of families seemed to strike a nerve with several of the candidates. Jessica could see the wheels turning in their minds. The assumption that she was using emotional manipulation rather than tactical analysis to make her point. Lieutenant Chen, who had remained quiet throughout the exercise and debrief, finally spoke up. "Ma'am, what specifically should we have done differently?" Jessica moved to the tactical display board, her movements precise and confident as she began diagramming the failed mission. Your breach formation left a 60-degree blind zone on your eastern approach. The enemy forces I warned you about were positioned in that exact area. A simple adjustment to your movement pattern would have provided overlapping fields of fire and eliminated that vulnerability. She continued the analysis, breaking down each phase of the mission with the methodical precision that had earned her recognition as a tactical expert. Gradually, the hostile expressions around her began to shift as the candidates recognized the validity of her critique. Furthermore, Jessica concluded, the speed of your approach compromised your ability to gather intelligence about the hostage situation. In a real scenario, that could have resulted in civilian casualties that would have made the entire mission a strategic failure, regardless of whether you neutralized the threat. The briefing area fell silent as the implications of her analysis sank in. These soldiers had been so focused on demonstrating their physical courage and tactical aggression that they had ignored the intellectual aspects of mission planning and execution. Rodriguez, who had been the most vocal critic, raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, how do you recommend we adjust our training approach to avoid these mistakes in future exercises?" The question represented a small victory, an acknowledgement that Jessica's analysis had merit beyond their personal prejudices about her qualifications. But as she began outlining her recommendations for improved training protocols, Jessica knew that this was just the first of many battles she would have to fight to prove herself worthy of their respect. The personal cost, the professional. Challenges Jessica faced at Fort Braxton were compounded by the personal struggles of single parenthood in a military environment. Emma, despite her resilient 7-year-old spirit, was having difficulty adjusting to their new life on base. Each evening, when Jessica picked up Emma from the childcare center, she could see the strain in her daughter's eyes. The other military. Children had established social groups and routines that Emma struggled to penetrate. Her quiet, thoughtful nature, so similar to her mother's, made it difficult for her to assert herself in the playground politics of military kids who had grown up moving from base to base. "Mrs. Patterson says, I need to try harder to make friends," Emma said one evening as they walked home from the childcare center. The autumn air was crisp, and the base was transitioning into its evening routine as soldiers completed their daily training and prepared for family time. "What do you think about that advice?" Jessica asked, always careful to validate Emma's own feelings rather than immediately offering solutions. Emma kicked at a small stone on the sidewalk, her shoulders slumped with the weight of social rejection. "I try, Mommy. But when I tell them about our old base, they say I'm bragging, and when I don't talk, they say I'm weird." Jessica's heart ached for her daughter, recognizing the same struggle for acceptance that she was facing in her own professional environment. The parallel wasn't lost on her. Both she and Emma were outsiders trying to find their place in an established community that viewed them with suspicion. Their base housing unit was identical to hundreds of others on the installation, a modest, 2-bedroom apartment with standard military furnishings and the sterile feel of temporary accommodation. Jessica had tried to make it feel like home with Emma's artwork on the walls and family photos on the kitchen counter, but both of them knew they were still in transition. The evenings were the hardest part of their routine. After Emma's homework was completed and dinner was finished, they would sit together on the small couch, reading books or watching carefully selected television programs. But Jessica could see Emma's longing for the kind of stable family life that surrounded them on base. Fathers coming home from work, siblings playing together, mothers who weren't constantly preoccupied with proving themselves professionally. "Mommy," Emma said one night as Jessica was tucking her into bed, "why don't I have a daddy like the other kids?" The question had come up periodically since the divorce, and Jessica had developed age-appropriate responses that emphasized love and stability, without criticizing David or making Emma feel responsible for their family situation. "You do have a daddy, sweetheart. He just lives far away right now. And you have a mommy who loves you very much and will always take care of you. But why does everyone look at us funny when we go places together? Like we don't belong here?" Jessica sat on the edge of Emma's bed, struggling with how to explain adult prejudices to a child who deserved to feel secure and accepted. Sometimes people make assumptions about others based on what they see on the outside. They don't know our story or understand that families come in many different shapes and sizes. Is it because you're a soldier and a mommy at the same time? The perceptiveness of the question caught Jessica off guard. Even at 7 years old, Emma was beginning to understand the unique challenges they faced as a single-parent military family. Being a soldier and a mommy are both important parts of who I am, Jessica explained carefully. Some people think those two things don't go together, but I know they make each other stronger. I'm a better soldier because I'm your mommy, and I'm a better mommy because I'm a soldier. Emma considered this explanation with the serious expression she inherited from her mother. Will it get easier? I think it will, Jessica said, though she wasn't entirely convinced herself. We just need to be patient and show everyone who we really are. As she turned off Emma's bedroom light and closed the door, Jessica wondered if she was being fair to her daughter. The military had given Jessica purpose, identity, and career advancement, but it was also subjecting Emma to challenges that civilian children never faced. The constant moves, the deployment separations, the social dynamics of military communities, all of these factors shaped military children in ways that wouldn't become apparent until much later in their lives. The growing tension by the end of her first month at Fort Braxton, Jessica had established a routine that balanced her professional responsibilities with Emma's needs, but the underlying tensions with her unit continued to simmer beneath the surface. The failed training exercise had damaged her credibility, despite her valid tactical analysis, and subsequent training sessions revealed an ongoing pattern of subtle resistance to her authority. The resistance took many forms. Soldiers would arrive, late to briefings, claiming unavoidable delays that never seemed to affect other commanders' sessions. Equipment requests would be processed slowly, forcing Jessica to work around missing or inadequate training materials. Most frustrating of all, the informal communication network that was crucial to effective military leadership seemed to exclude her entirely. Master Sergeant Torres had become the unofficial spokesperson for the unit's concerns, approaching Jessica regularly with feedback from the soldiers under her command. His manner was always respectful and professional, but the message was clear. Her leadership was being questioned and evaluated by subordinates who felt entitled to judge her fitness for command. "Ma'am," Torres said during one of their weekly meetings, "the men are concerned about operational readiness standards. They feel like the training regimen has become too theoretical, not enough practical application." Jessica looked up from the training schedules she had been reviewing, recognizing another veiled criticism of her leadership style. "Can you be more specific about these concerns, Sergeant Torres?" "Well, ma'am, we're spending a lot of time on tactical analysis and scenario planning. These soldiers are accustomed to more hands-on training, live fire exercises, close quarters combat, physical conditioning. They're worried about maintaining their edge. The tactical analysis is designed to improve their decision-making under pressure," Jessica explained patiently. "Physical skills are important, but mental preparation can be the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure." Torres nodded respectfully, but Jessica could see the skepticism in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. But these men have been in combat situations where split-second reactions matter more than textbook solutions. They need to trust their instincts, not overthink every decision." The conversation revealed the fundamental disconnect between Jessica's approach to leadership and the culture she was trying to change. Her emphasis on intellectual preparation and strategic thinking was being interpreted as a lack of confidence in traditional military training methods. More troubling were the reports Jessica was beginning to receive from other parts of the base about her unit's reputation. During a brief conversation with Major Patricia Williams from the base medical unit, Jessica learned that word of her struggles was spreading throughout the installation. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, Major," Williams said over coffee in the officers' club, "but there's talk about your unit's morale issues. Some people are suggesting that the Special Operations Training Program might need a leadership change. Jessica felt her stomach tighten with anxiety, but she kept her expression neutral. What kind of talk? The usual gossip about women in combat. Roles, unfortunately. People questioning whether motherhood and military leadership are compatible. Colonel Harrison has been fielding questions from other base commanders about the program's effectiveness. The revelation that her professional struggles were becoming public knowledge was deeply troubling. Jessica had faced sexism throughout her military career, but never at this level of visibility or with such high stakes. The Special Operations Training Division was a prestigious assignment that could define the rest of her career. Failure here would likely end her prospects for further advancement and potentially force her out of the military entirely. That evening, as Jessica helped Emma with her homework at their small kitchen table, she found herself questioning the choices that had brought them to this point. Emma was working on a school project about families, drawing pictures of different family structures and explaining how each one was special in its own way. "Look, Mommy," Emma said proudly, holding up her drawing of the two of them standing in front of a military base. "This is our family. You're protecting everyone, and I'm being brave like you." The simple drawing hit Jessica with unexpected emotional force. In Emma's eyes, their situation wasn't a problem to be solved or a weakness to be overcome. It was simply their reality, and one that made her proud of her mother's service. "That's a beautiful picture, sweetheart," Jessica said, her voice thick, with emotion. "Can you tell me about the brave part?" "Well," Emma said with the matter-of-fact tone that children use to explain obvious truths, "it's brave to be different from everyone else. And it's brave to keep trying when people are mean to you. You do both of those things every day." As Jessica looked at her daughter's artwork, she realized that she had been measuring her success by the wrong standards. Instead of focusing on winning the approval of soldiers who were determined to see her as unfit for command, she should be concentrating on proving her competence through results. The respect of her peers would follow naturally if she could demonstrate that her methods produced better trained, more effective soldiers. But first, she would need to survive long enough to implement her vision for the training program. And, based on the growing resistance she faced, that survival was becoming increasingly uncertain with each passing day. The warning signs as October progressed. Jessica began to notice disturbing patterns in her interactions with base leadership that suggested her position was becoming increasingly precarious. Colonel Harrison's weekly briefings, which had initially been professional if cool, took on a more evaluative tone that made it clear her performance was under scrutiny. "Your unit's completion rates for advanced tactical scenarios are below base standards," Harrison noted during one particularly tense meeting. "The other training divisions are expressing concerns about the readiness of soldiers rotating through your program." Jessica had prepared for this criticism, bringing detailed performance metrics that told a different story. "Sir, if you look at the long-term retention rates and mission success indicators, soldiers who complete our enhanced tactical analysis program show significant improvement in complex decision-making scenarios." Harrison barely glanced at her. "Charts and graphs." "Martinez, the military doesn't have time for experimental training methods. We need soldiers who can execute standard operating procedures under pressure, not philosophers who overthink every tactical decision. With respect, sir, modern warfare requires both physical and intellectual preparation. The threats our soldiers face in the field are becoming increasingly complex and require adaptive thinking rather than rote responses. What they require," Harrison said sharply, "is confidence in their leadership. And right now, that confidence is severely lacking in your unit." The meeting ended with an ultimatum disguised as encouragement. "I'm giving you another month to turn things around, Martinez. If your unit's performance metrics don't improve significantly, we'll need to consider reassignment options that might be better suited to your particular circumstances." The phrase, "particular circumstances," was clearly a reference to her single parenthood, though Harrison was too experienced to make that connection explicitly. Jessica left his office knowing that she was fighting for her military career and, by extension, the financial security and stability that Emma depended on. 3. Pressure was beginning to affect Emma as well. The 7-year-old was perceptive enough to sense her mother's stress, even though Jessica tried to maintain a calm facade at home. Emma's sleep became restless, and she started asking more frequent questions about their future plans and whether they would have to move again soon. "Mrs. Patterson says some kids might be changing schools after the holidays," Emma mentioned one evening during dinner. She didn't say which kids, but everyone was looking at me when she said it. Jessica's heart sank at the implication that even the childcare staff were speculating about their potential departure from Fort Braxton. In the closed environment of a military base, gossip traveled fast, and Emma was apparently becoming aware of her family's uncertain status. "We're not planning to move right now, sweetheart," Jessica said carefully. "But you know that military families sometimes have to change bases when parents get new assignments." "Would you get a new assignment because you're not doing a good job here?" Emma asked with the devastating directness that only children possess. The question forced Jessica to confront the possibility that her professional struggles were affecting her daughter's sense of security and self-worth. Emma had already endured the disruption of her parents' divorce and multiple relocations. The uncertainty of their situation at Fort Braxton was clearly weighing on the 7-year-old's mind. That night, after Emma was asleep, Jessica sat at her kitchen table reviewing training reports and performance evaluations. The data actually supported her training methods. Soldiers who completed her program showed measurable improvements in tactical decision-making and mission adaptability. But those improvements came at the cost of traditional metrics that the military used to evaluate training effectiveness. Her enhanced scenario-based training took longer to complete than standard programs, resulting in lower throughput numbers. Her emphasis on tactical analysis required more intellectual engagement from soldiers who preferred physical challenges. Most importantly, her methods challenged assumptions about military leadership and training that were deeply embedded in Fort Braxton's institutional culture. As Jessica closed her laptop and prepared for bed, she touched the small photo of Emma that she kept on her desk. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she had faced difficult odds before. Her military training had taught her that sometimes the most important battles aren't won through force, but through persistence, precision, and the quiet determination to prove doubters wrong. She thought about her father's words from her childhood. "Strength isn't about overpowering your opponents. It's about outlasting them." Jessica had learned that lesson in combat zones overseas, and now she was applying it to a different kind of battlefield. The question wasn't whether she could handle combat. Her service record spoke for itself. The real test was whether she could change hearts and minds, one training session at a time. Whether she could show her soldiers that a mother's fierce protectiveness, channeled through military precision, created not weakness, but an unshakable foundation of strength. As she turned off the lights and headed to bed, Jessica Martinez knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would meet them with the same unwavering dedication that had carried her through every obstacle in her military career. Because this time, she wasn't just fighting for respect or advancement, she was fighting for the right to serve her country while being the mother Emma deserved.